All right, thanks for joining us here. My name's Izzy Alkfast. We had a DLF draft in Chicago. With me is Nick Whalen. We hosted this live at the Aberdeen Tap. Not quite sure the exact location because Chicago is monstrous, but it was somewhere. Just Google it. It was live. We had 12 guys there. We did the math. We averaged one pick per minute, which is phenomenal. We thought we'd be there for 8 hours. We got done in 4.
Professionals, right?
We're professionals.
It was like a job.
You could argue that some of these picks were a bit sketchy. We'll get to that. What we want to do is kind of highlight the reaches and I guess the steals or the values, the really good values for everybody. And then maybe talk about maybe strategy that a few guys went into it with, kind of our experience, how the draft went. Nick's got an interesting experience, probably the first time he's ever gone into a draft with this specific experience, and we'll get to that when we get to Team 9 is where he draft spot 9. So I drew the first overall pick. It was rigged. And with the first pick, I took Odell Beckham Jr., and that's kind of how I started my draft. Kind of taking it through, my strategy was, since I'm basically I kind of talk for myself here, is my strategy was to take Odell Beckham right away and then see if I can land Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson, or maybe even both. If I can get lucky and have them both drop to me, I was going to go back-to-back quarterback. However, all 4 of the top 4 quarterbacks were gone. So I was left making a decision. I didn't want to reach for a running back at that spot. I wanted to leave the draft with Dante Moncrief. That was my goal. I own a few shares of him, but he was a guy that's like, I typically don't like to take reaches and take, the chances, but I felt Moncrief had a high enough floor in Indy's offense that I felt comfortable taking him in round 3. So I took him there, and then I followed it back around. Quarterbacks started popping off the board again, and I didn't want to reach for more quarterbacks. So I took what I felt was value in Kelvin Benjamin, and I did the same thing with Tate. Took 2 values there, and I was stuck with 5 receivers. Since it is 3 receivers and 1 super flex and 2 flex, I figure, okay, this is going to be my 3 receivers and 2 flex. So I started out 5 heavy, and then I mixed in Kelsey, and then I got my 2 quarterbacks. I took a gamble. There's a huge quarterback run, and I was able to get Stafford, and luckily Joe Flacco fell to me on the way back. And then what I ended up doing at the end of my draft is starting in round 9, I really went heavy in upside guys that I feel like I can trade at some point in time. So I started with Duke Johnson, Carson Wentz, basically all young guys. A lot of people will do the exact opposite, where they kind of go with old veterans to kind of give that support to their back end. But I went young guys for upside for trade bait. I took the first non-labeled individual with Martavis Bryant in the 11th round. And what I want Nick to do is talk about my, steals and reaches. So Nick, talking about, the values or the steals that you felt were good based on the draft board, what did you like that I did?
Yeah, so, even just starting with your Martavis Bryant pick, I thought it was a good gamble. When you're in the 11th round of a draft, you're not really going to get a superstar, but he has that upside. So as you were talking about, you wanted to get someone on the trade bait that, hey, could have some value. Obviously not this year, but later on you really could do that. So that's a good gamble there. Starting off, though, again, when it's start one quarterback in a super flex, quarterbacks are important. Getting Matt Stafford in round 7, I thought was a really good value, especially when you look. I personally have Stafford kind of near the Carr and the Matt Ryan and Phillip Rivers type of an area, and you got him,
17,
many rounds behind you. So he's quarterback 17. So that's a lot of good, time that you could get some more players in here and then still get your value. So that was nice. And then you waited, and then Flacco came back to you, which it was
quarterback 23.
Yeah, quarterback 23, which is, I don't know why he's there. That was a really good pick. And, I was jealous because I wanted more quarterbacks to fall to me. So I think getting those 2 guys, because they're solid, there's no job jeopardy there. They're sustained. Maybe a supporting cast is going to get a little better for Flacco. But I thought they were 2 really good picks. Now, we might get in a little a fight on air here, or a rumble in the jungle, whatever. Josh Ferguson is a guy that Izzy really likes. He took him in round 14. I thought that was the one major reach that he had. Now, again, if that's your first major reach and it's round 14, it's a pretty good draft. But I thought Josh Ferguson, I think he would be a little bit later pick. Sure, he has some upside there and is a pass catching back in Indianapolis, but I thought there were some other prospects that he could have gotten, especially when you look at like Bradford and Kaepernick. I mean, those are really good values as well, but you take a Ferguson ahead of time. I thought it was a little bit of a reach.
Yeah, and kind of defending my Ferguson pick, I've been on the Ferguson bandwagon for 9-10 months.
He was in middle school, right?
He was middle school.
Yeah.
So I wanted to leave this draft with Josh Ferguson at some point in time. I feel like in Indy's offense, their defense is weak. Gore's getting old. They're going to be high volume, and I have a feeling that Josh Ferguson will have a role in the pass catching in the receiving game. And the reason why I felt 14 was a good value is we look at the running backs that were taken before him. It was Alex Collins, Paul Perkins, Jordan Howard. I felt like he's in the same kind of echelon of players. So I felt comfortable. Okay, well, I like him more than Jonathan Williams and the Kenyon Drake. So I'm going to pull the trigger on Josh Ferguson here because he's not going to make it around to me. So I took him, and he profiles incredibly well in today's NFL, and he will always have a role because I think he is the best receiving back in the draft. In today's NFL, that's very important. So I think he has a pretty high floor relative to his draft position. So I like the Josh Ferguson pick. I understand why individuals wouldn't like him. I understand why Nick doesn't necessarily like him. He is injury prone as well. He has durability concerns. But I felt in the 14th round it was worth the shot in the dark to take Ferguson there. When we look at transition for my team, I think that pretty much covers it. As you can tell, out of all the teams, I took 6 quarterbacks. I ended up taking Bradford, Kaepernick, and McCown later on in the draft, and Hightower was kind of the Mr. Irrelevant. But if we look at transitioning to Mo's team, Mo was kind of one of the he was quiet at the draft. He was the only one that brought an actual magazine, so just made sure he had all the players written down. He was in his little hub, and he was just grinding away doing his draft.
Well, real quick, one thing to make this interesting: no computers are allowed.
Yes.
All this technology. I mean, what we're doing right now, technology. No computers, no phones. So it was paper, pen. So he got the magazine. So really, he was trying to be in the upper echelon of. There were colored pages there.
Absolutely. And another thing we should highlight on the Periscopes, but not everybody watches the Periscopes, but this league is super flex, 1 super flex, 2 flex, quarter point per carry, 1 full point PPR, and then 1.5 for tight end. So it's a tight end premium as well. Try to balance out all the positions. So you may notice there's some interesting picks there, but it's the format. So Mo started with right away. He went veteran receiver. He's going for the win now. Took David Johnson. 3 solid win now picks. Just the cornerstone. I really liked it. He had some interesting picks, but I wouldn't say Mo had a huge boomer bust draft. He didn't take any reaches, and I don't think he really hit a home run with value either. There's a couple picks that we like in particular. I'll let Nick highlight. What did you like that Mo did in this draft?
Yeah, I'm not really a big fan of this player, but I thought, especially when you get the quarter point per carry and even point per reception, getting Jeremy Langford, who, we're in Chicago doing this right now. Is he going to be the starter long term? All that kind of stuff. But it's round 11. So, it's right when you took your Martavis gamble. Jeremy Langford's right there. I thought it was a pretty good pick, especially considering, Langford could be in this category of Duke Johnson and Hill and Procise and some of those. Ajayi, you got him a little bit later there. So I thought that was a decent value. Now, in the same realm, a little bit of a reach I thought was TJ Yeldon. The Jaguars, they paid a lot of money to Chris Ivory. What's going to happen there long term? I think if he's the answer, you wouldn't spend that much money on another guy and bringing him in. So taking him before even Henry or Duke, guys that look like they're going to have a job more long term. I'm not as big on DeMarco, but we're going to get into that later, I assume. I didn't think that one was a little bit of a reach anyway.
Yeah, and another thing, out of all the players, this will probably be the first and last time this will ever happen. But Mo Brewington in the 21st round took Can Severin, a Pittsburgh wide receiver, rookie out of Virginia. You do the Devery report. I watched a lot of college film. I had no idea who that was.
Nope.
he is from Philadelphia, I believe. He is in the Pennsylvania area, so he might hear certain things that most of us don't hear. I mean, he's got the inside scoop. I talked to Dan Sanyo, who was there. He's like, I know him, and what Dan said was he's more of like a 16-team, 50 roster type of player, but Mo was compelled enough to take him for whatever the reason is. We'll find out in a couple years if this pick hits. Even if it hits, he didn't have to take him. He could have waited months and nobody would have been on that wagon. So even then, it's still a reach because there are players that, even a guy like, just looking at Albert Wilson, he profiles as potentially, the Steve Smith, they profile as players that could, start and produce now. But yeah, I thought that was an interesting pick, probably the most interesting pick in all of the draft. But I thought Mo had a pretty solid draft. He went Carr, Cousins, Brady. He took his 3 quarterbacks early, got out of the way. I like the trio that he has there. He's got David Johnson, Carlos Hyde, Derrick Henry, TJ Yeldon, Langford. 5 guys. He can throw a few of those in the super flex, which is great. The area that Mo is going to have trouble with is he took his 2 receivers early, but he waited until the 12th round to start taking his wide receiver 3, and that would be Will Fuller. You can make the argument that Garcon's going to be the wide receiver 3 this year, and he hopes that Will Fuller can develop into that guy. However, the depth at that position is really going to hurt him. So I see Mo Brewington making a move at some point in time, moving maybe a Langford or a Henry or a Yeldon, and securing a receiver at some point in time. So that'll be interesting to see. Go ahead, Nick.
Well, actually, in the problem is, I mean, competing this year, you're hoping Garcon can do it because Fuller, again, a rookie, you can't count on a lot year one. So that's a lot of pressure for him. He's probably not going to do it. And then you have a guy like Seth Roberts. He's the wide receiver 3 in Oakland, maybe. And Cruz has come back from the injury. So it was a lot of gambling here. It wasn't a lot of support. So I think he almost has to move somebody if he wants to compete in 2016. I
agree. And I really like Seth Roberts as a prospect, but like you said, he probably won't have a role unless Cooper or Crabtree get hurt. So yeah, he's definitely going to be in the market for a receiver. And I think he knows that as well. Any final thoughts on Mo before we transition to Austin?
Yeah, no, Mo, in the beginning, he's firing away picks. Oh man, we couldn't write him down fast enough, get the stickers ready. Later on, Mo was, taking his time. He's the guy when he played chess, he's thinking, all those moves ahead. He was really, really into it. So it was interesting to see a little switch there, but it was really cool to meet him. I'm glad he came.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a couple of times where we were looking for Mo, and he was outside on the patio having a smoke, and he looked stressed out. So he was all in to this. He was trying to calm his nerves a little bit for his next pick. But transition to Austin. Bet this guy, great guy. We had dinner with him on Friday night. Smart as a whip. I mean, I like what he did in a lot of places. There's a few instances where maybe not, but overall I think he had a very stable and valuable draft. I don't think he took many chances, and we'll highlight maybe the 1 or 2 guys that he may have taken a reach, but he didn't do any major damage to his team in terms of value early on. But Nick, talk about his draft.
Yeah, and he was one of them where, again, we looked these over ahead of time. It was tough to find a bunch of holes in his team or gambles. Really good value I liked was Doug Martin in round 5. So Doug Martin, just signed the new contract, kind of came back a little bit last year. And he got him after Carlos Hyde because, in my opinion, with my rankings, at DLF, I think he's running back. Was
7, I believe.
Yeah, I thought it was 7. So when you look, so you have Gurley and Zeke and Bell, Johnson, Miller. Oh, there's 6, AP, Lacey 7. So you can see he's a value here, and he got him much later. So that was a really good, heads up by him to grab him. And one gamble late, I like him. Sharon Peak out of Clemson. There was a lot of talent there, obviously with Sammy Watkins, Martavis Bryant, Mike Williams, Deion Kane. I mean, they have Artavis Scott. They have a lot of talent there at wide receiver. He didn't really get to showcase it a lot. He had the ACL, good athlete, all that kind of stuff. Now he's buried with the Jets. So he took the gamble here, and then he followed up with Devin Smith, who I thought he should have picked the first time, but it's fine. So that was the one I would say was kind of a little bit more of a reach. The one thing that if you had to point out about his whole team, that there's one thing that's really glaring. So again, 1 quarterback in Superflex. He's only got 2 quarterbacks, and this guy hey, these clavicles, Izzy,
Yeah.
they're
Oh,
weak.
absolutely.
They're weak clavicles, man. So that's the one thing you're like, he needs to get another quarterback and at least someone that is going to stay healthy.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point. If his team stays healthy, he has a very strong starting lineup. He's got Romo and Rodgers, which is probably a top 5 duo in this league. You got Julio Jones, T.Y. Hilton, Eric Decker, Deshaun Jackson. That could be his veterans that kind of hold his receiving corps together. And then he took Doug Martin, Jeremy Hill, Ryan Matthews, Danny Woodhead. 4 running backs that will get work this year. And Eifert, which, consensus is a top 5 tight end no matter where you go. So in terms of balance starting lineups, he has a very solid starting lineup. His depth is a little iffy, and especially at his quarterback position. So I might be a guy that he might, say, hey, how much would it cost to get Bradford off your hands? So he might be a guy that I have make a deal with at some point in time in this offseason before the season starts. But overall, I think it was a really solid draft and a team that I would be shocked if this setup did not make the playoffs in year 1.
Well, and you said depth. I mean, I think it's only quarterback because when you look at running back, I mean, even Ryan Matthews is set up really well. Woodhead is, and then he mixed in, the young guy with DeAndre Washington. But then at wide receiver, you got, Steve Smith if he's going to come back. But then you have, Vincent Jackson. Ellington has some hype, and that's we're talking wide receiver 5, 6, 7 there. So he had a really balanced roster outside of the quarterback. So yeah, I would. Izzy, send out some offers tonight.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Let's see if you want Bradford or not.
It kind of, now that you mentioned it, he actually doesn't really have much youth outside of Doxson going early. Most of his guys are 26 and older.
Mm-hmm.
Josh Doxson's the only guy, and DeAndre Washington are the only, and outside of these flyers late, but he's got a very veteran roster. He's got more guys over the age of 30 than under the age of 27. But yeah, I think a really solid draft. He's going to have some work to do in rookie drafts to kind of bolster that roster long term, but really good start for year 1 for sure. Transitioning to Team McDowell, Brian Malone. They had the advantage of having 2 really, really smart guys. They didn't do much talking to anybody. They're in the zone talking across from each other. They were all in.
Well, the best part about it is they would get really close and they would get like this, and we could not hear what they were saying. But man, the strategy was just it was everything you would probably expect from them. I mean, they both write, I think, like 10 articles a day, and they release them on RotoViz and DLF and wherever. And they were all business about this draft, but it was really cool to see them, in action. So
yeah.
Yeah,
McDowell at one point forgot that his wife was there. Like, he was so in the zone. He's like, yeah, Erin, she's back home taking care of the kids. And she's like, I'm right here. Oh, that's right. Erin came with me. Like, he was on another planet.
Who, by the way, Erin inputted all of our picks into the MFL. So thank you, Erin, if you're watching this. That was awesome of you to do that.
Yeah, she was great. All the spouses, everybody was great there. So we were blessed to have everybody there, and everybody's helping out. It's great. But going into his draft, this is a team that there wasn't much. I could not figure out what their strategy was. Were they trying to win? Were they trying to maybe kind of do a hybrid where they're potentially maybe hoping some pieces early hit? But the big thing is they took a couple of young receivers in the 4-5 with Corey Coleman and Sterling Shepard to help the receiving corps with Allen Robinson. They also went and took Brashard Perriman and Leonte Carew. So they went really young at receiver, and they need immediate production to produce this year. But they also took an older Drew Brees, and it's interesting. It was an interesting strategy. I couldn't figure out what their actual mission was for this year, but take me through what you felt was a highlight and maybe their lowlights of their draft.
Yeah, so just real quick to touch on that, it was tough for me because I'm trying to figure out what they're doing because the 3 quarterbacks early, obviously, hey, that's really important to them. They're committed to this year. But like you said, again, we talked about this earlier when you're trying to count on some young receivers like Will Fuller to do it year 1. Coleman and Shepard and Perriman's basically a rookie. Carew's the same way. I mean, even Jalen Strong down here. So, okay, are they going to do it? But then you mix in Agor, who is a 1-year guy. You mix in Dion Lewis, who I'm not a huge fan of. How long is he going to be there for? How many years of Brees? So are you wasting some of these valuable years of these guys, waiting on these guys to develop? So that was the tough part. But talking through some of the guys, one of the biggest reaches I thought right away was Sterling Shepard. Now I know he has a lot of hype, but we're talking round 5 right here. So we're coming back around. Izzy got 2 pretty good guys I thought there, and Shepard goes here, but you still have some. Again, we talked about maybe a veteran there, like a Macklin is still out there, which I think would have been pieced together well to fit that whole roster. It looked like it was a little bit of a reach there. Maybe they really believe in him, and that's fine. But I thought that was a little bit of a reach, especially when, they could have gotten even another running back to pair with Lamar or even a Matt Ryan instead. And then later, Dion Lewis, again, it's just, what are they doing? Like if they were going to go young, that doesn't make sense. He's 26, he's, not super proven. Those are the 2 I thought they were the most reach picks. Really good pick I liked was Eric Ebron. I mean, we're talking round 11, and as you touched, 1.5 PPR for tight ends. That's a good point to make here. Hey, why is Eric Ebron there? Young guy, super athletic, in round 11, nonetheless.
Yeah, absolutely. And a guy that I really like that's flown under the radar all offseason is Chris Thompson. And they got him. He was a guy that I was looking to target. They got him in the 19th round. He's a guy to keep an eye on. Matt Jones may not profile as a 3-down back, and I think Chris Thompson's going to have a huge role in that offense. So he's another guy that I think will produce for him in this year, maybe even in the future, depends on how he is. He's in the mold of the Theo Riddicks and the Duke Johnsons potentially.
Josh Ferguson.
And Josh Ferguson types, exactly. Kind of highlighting on Dion Lewis, I would much rather have a Duke Johnson or a Derrick Henry instead of a Dion Lewis. I don't know. I thought it was early as well. I think that was the one that Nick and I really agreed on that said, definitely not a guy that we would have taken. And that being said, we're not very high on Dion Lewis to begin with, but I have a tough time believing that they took him as a top 20 running back, and I don't know if he's even consensus top 20 in rankings. So we might not even be the only ones in that setting. But yeah, overall, I agree with you. It's very interesting what they did. They're going to be making moves and shaking. They're 2 very active owners to begin with. I expect them to make a lot of moves. How does Josh Gordon affect Corey Coleman now? His value did not get affected the way I thought it would with Josh Gordon coming back.
Yep.
The interesting thing was Sterling Shepard was a reach. However, he would have got taken by Dan Sanio. He's a huge Sterling Shepard guy. So maybe they knew that there's no way Sterling Shepard's going to make it to round 6, and they really wanted their guy. That's the price you pay when everybody kind of knows each other's ranks, and we're all out on Twitter and everything's there for us. So it was more of probably defense than it was, being, providing offense for their team. So McDowell and Malone will definitely need to make some moves to shore up. They need to bring in some veterans to help their receiving corps for sure. But I would not be surprised if they made a few changes before the season started. So going on to Finley, the kind of the dark night, let's say, of this draft, the guy that broke the seal at running back, and he did the unthinkable. He basically he avoided receiver for his first few picks, and he went running back. Very old school.
I remember doing that, though. Don't you remember? That was like the way. And all your drafts, like, okay, you take 2 running backs. You might take another one, and they do something else. So he really took this quarter point per carry really seriously.
Yep, and that was kind of his main thing. It's like quarter point per carry. Gurley jumps on my board. Bell was a great value there in round 2 just because of the 4-game suspension. And he's right. If Bell doesn't get suspended, Bell probably goes somewhere in this range. So he's absolutely right. That is good value there if Bell does not think he's a rapper for the rest of his life. What do you think of Ryan Finley's draft overall? Like, where do you think he's going to have an issue? What picks did you like? What picks did you kind of wish he would have maybe gone a different direction?
Yeah, I mean, right from the start with that, it kind of sets a precedent where he can win right now. The thing where I think he reached a little bit would be Winston right here. I mean, the 3rd pick, so it comes back around. He's taking Winston after the studs happen, and I think it was just a bit early. Now, I know with the Superflex, you wanted to get that quarterback, but he really could have taken a few wide receivers there that I thought would have kind of meshed more. Because, I mean, Winston's only going to his 2nd year, and you really have to have some high expectations to pair with again, the prime years of these running backs, which we know are very valuable. And then he continued it with Lockett. Now, I know the Matt Harmon bump, right? We call it. But, man, round 4 with Lockett, I mean, ahead of, some first-round picked wide receivers. And, again, I'm not just saying this because Izzy's right here. With Kelvin Benjamin and Golden Tate, like, those guys are, they've done it. And even Benjamin with the 1 year was a lot better than Lockett. So I thought it was a little bit of reaches here, maybe even Cutler down here. I mean, he took Cutler before Dalton, Eli, Flacco. I thought that was, Palmer. I mean, I thought it was a little bit of a reach, but a couple picks that I really liked. One, Torrey Smith late. I mean, he's going to be the wide receiver 1 there. It's going to be better than the 49ers have to be better than last year, right? I mean, it was bad. And even really late, this is just a personal sleeper I could like. Chris Moore, I like that one late. I mean, it's a decent gamble for a guy that's looked good in camp. But overall, it's a very interesting team. I mean, like you said, with the running backs, I mean, a couple of quarterbacks, but the receivers, they're all really short and they're young. Like, I don't know if they're going to be good or not. And then even tight end, he went double young here. And Austin Seferian-Jenkins, I don't know what's going to happen with him. So there's a lot of question marks with this team.
Yeah, he went team sub 6 feet wide receiver, almost team slot if you want to look at it. Lockett, Brown, Snead, Diggs. I mean, his first 4 receivers are sub 6 feet. I mean, Snead might be the only guy that may crack. I think he's like 5'11", 5'10".
Mm-hmm.
So with him, he's gonna put all the pressure on Rawls, Bell, and Gurley for this year. And who knows? And here's the interesting thing about it is, his core is his running backs, and you take a running back that's suspended for 4 games, a running back that has company in the backfield,
even
Jay Ajayi. The issue is he's building his beginning of a 2017 contender, but he didn't follow it up with enough pieces, I feel, in the middle of the draft to say, okay, he's going to have a successful first year. And even going into next year, now you're putting pressure on your running backs to sustain their production for another year. And we all know kind of the expectation, the narrative is 2017 running back class. Who knows what's going to happen, so on and so forth. So regardless, I think there were some good picks. I think Finley, out of anybody, said, here are the guys that I want, and I'm not going to leave this draft without them. He made sure he was going to get Winston. He made sure he was going to get Lockett. I think Cutler was a preference. He preferred Cutler over Dalton and Eli. And I get it. I think he's a Bears fan, if I'm not mistaken. So, Bears fan, I get it. We all have done it at some point in time where we take the guys that we like to watch on Sundays. I can respect it, but it still is a reach to me. Torrey Smith, I agree. I think it's great value. Hunter Henry's a sneaky good pick this late in round 15. Probably won't do anything this year. He needed, a veteran like a Zach Miller here, and he didn't fall to him. Even Jason Witten didn't fall to him. So he was stuck taking in a Ben Watson. So Ben Watson's probably going to be a starting tight end. So there is a good mix of youth and veterans. However, I think the way that it was designed was difficult for the 2017 season. It'll be interesting to see what he does, 2016 season. It'll be interesting to see what he does moving forward for this year. But you look at his team, and I look at this and say, he doesn't necessarily need to make a trade for anybody. You know what I mean? He doesn't have a glaring hole at any of his positions. It's just the preference that we have is we don't like the smaller receivers as being he doesn't have a wide receiver 1 here. He has maybe a wide receiver 2 in there. Maybe a John Brown can sneak into wide receiver. One of these guys might be able to sneak into wide receiver 2 range, but he's flying with wide receiver 3s, in my opinion. I think all these guys will profile in the 25 to 30, 36 range in terms of where they're going to finish the season. So he's going to have a tough time at the receiver position. But overall, I like how he broke the seal early with the running backs. That could pay big dividends for him moving forward. Moving on to Carla. She also stepped outside of the box a little bit, went away from the receivers. The tight end premium got her. She even said, Gronk, tight end premium, he's my guy. I wanted to take him. she followed him up with same thing. She almost did what Finley did was sub 6 feet wide receivers. She took Landry, Baldwin, and then she took her two quarterbacks with Matt Ryan and Tyrod Taylor. AP, we'll get to that in a second here, but also some solid balance early on. Had a good mix to start. A lot of red, purple, green, yellow early on. Take me through what you liked and didn't like. I think out of everybody, she was the most polarizing for us in terms of the picks she made.
Yeah, you really never knew what she was going to do with the pick, which is good and bad, kind of. Sometimes if it's a guy you're not really high on, you're fine with it. But if it's a guy you really liked, kind of what you said with Ryan, I think Carla said, hey, you know what? I'm going to take advantage of the format, and I'm going to get the people that I like. So with that tight end 1.5 PPR, I mean, she went with 3 tight ends within the first 10 rounds of the draft, which I thought was, that's an out there strategy. But again, if they put it together, and I thought one of her good value picks was Julius Thomas, because I like him. I think that they're going to utilize him more in Jacksonville when he's healthy. And in round 10, when you can get him there, and we were just talking about how questionable maybe ASJ is, that's a round later. So I thought that was a really good pick. Now, Fleener, a little earlier, I know there's a little hype there. I'm not a Fleener believer. I don't know if you are, but there's 3 rounds difference there, and I thought that was a little bit of a reach. And Adrian Peterson, we got to talk about this one, Izzy. Round 3 AP, I was shocked. I know you get a little bump with that, quarter point per carry, but man, you took AP before. We talked about where Martin is in the rankings. Lacey, even Ingram, Freeman. Freeman way down there. It was a big gamble. So that tells me, hey, year 1, I'm trying to compete. So I thought that was a reach, but then it didn't make sense for me personally when you take Procise in round 9. This says, hey, I want to win now. Maybe even Ivory, and the tight ends because they're going to produce. But man, mixing Procise in there didn't make a lot of sense. But Carla's a Notre Dame fan, so when she made this pick, I was like, Homer. So, it's an interesting mix overall. A couple other picks that I liked later, though. Rashard Matthews, he's running with the ones with Tennessee right now, and that's a pretty good pick, especially when you're looking in round 13 when you can get a starting wide receiver that cheap. And then quarterbacks, with how this is, Paxton Lynch. She waited, just hung and waited, and she got the last, I thought, real good quality quarterback prospect. Waited for Wentz to go and Goff to go, etc. And she got him. Now again, I got Alex Smith, so I'm not gonna say I'm partial to stuff, but I
flex those guns, Alex Smith. Let's go.
Yeah, but Paxton Lynch, I thought was a really good pick. I think he's got real good upside, especially with those receivers. So we'll see how it goes together. Again, an interesting mix of a team going young, old, position stuff.
Yeah. So kind of piggybacking on what you said. You mentioned she started out the draft. When this first happened, I'm like, okay, Carla's going to try to compete. Like, she's going for it. 2016. And I was digging it. I'm like, okay, fine. Landry, a little early for me. I would have taken some of these other receivers, Demarius, Cobb.
Yep.
Even like a T.Y. Hilton. I get the Landry pick, but I think it's a touch early. We couldn't make any trades. Maybe she trades down and tries to get him later, but we didn't have that option. For the sake of time, we just wanted to do a normal draft and just get through with it. So that's an interesting pick. AP screams win now. Baldwin. Then you take your 2 quarterbacks. I'm like, okay, she's got a phenomenal opportunity here. She's got her tight end. This is where I get hung up. She should have ignored Fleener. She should have taken Emmanuel Sanders, ran with Landry, Baldwin, Sanders, Ryan, and Tyrod, had AP and Chris Ivory, and she's got probably the best starting lineup to start. The most balanced with the highest quality. Even if she goes Fleener, sure, whatever. We can ignore that for a second. When you come all the way around, I get CJ Procise, Notre Dame guy, but if you're trying to win now, why not Michael Crabtree? I can get behind that. So she had a couple opportunities to get her receiver, and she continued to ignore it. I love the Julius Thomas pick there as the 9th tight end off the board. And like you said, the difference, I'd rather have Julius Thomas than Fleener, and she got him 3 rounds later. That to me, a phenomenal value. And then you're stuck now moving forward in 2016 with Matthews and Sanu and Hogan as your wide receiver 3s. She's going to need some help here. And I think the biggest thing was I'm okay with Ivory. I might have been a little early, but Fleener, Procise is really what she's going to look back on and be like, I probably should have done something a little different. But I love what she did early, even if Peterson's a reach. I liked where she was going with it. But pretty solid draft overall. Just a couple of minor errors that might affect her for this season. Going into Dan Meiler's team. Dan was the drinker of the team. Great guy, outgoing, phenomenal to have at the draft.
Loud. Very
Loud.
loud.
Yeah,
I didn't expect that.
So for me, for Dan, his picks were great, and then the drinks started coming in, and then for Dan, I'm just taking a shot at Dan. No, I actually think he had a pretty good draft, and when I look back at it, he probably has one of the better teams for 2016, and we'll highlight that here shortly. But talk about what you liked and what you did not like with his draft.
Well, one of the things that kind of startled me was when he made a pick. Yeah. He's like DeAndre Hopkins, like he's telling people. It was like Izzy would come over and he would I would
whisper it.
Yeah, it'd be like a note in code you would give him, and he had to decipher it and then make the pick. But yeah, Dan was like, he's telling people what his pick is. So it was cool. So right off the bat, I thought DeAndre Hopkins was a really good value. I mean, when you get him in a dynasty, the format, sure, could matter a little bit, but my goodness, I mean, you could argue him 4 or 5 for sure. That's where Hopkins is. So getting him there right off the bat, good value. Cooks, again, came on strong, young, good pairing. Lacey, he's a Packers fan. I thought that was a little bit of a reach right there. Again, we were talking about where the running backs go. I mean, I can't help but think, Doug Martin should be in front of him. Freeman should be ahead of him if you have to go running back there. But you also could keep going with a wide receiver train and get, White, Jordan Matthews, Parker, Treadwell, one of those other young guys to pair in there. So that one kind of threw me for a little bit of a loop. But hey, if it's your preference, you believe in P90X with Lacey, hey, go ahead, right? Just kind of still built it out well. I mean, with the running backs, things like that. But Ertz right here, that one really surprised me. We had talked about this. I mean, because right here, if you look at it, 3 running backs, 3 receivers.
Yep.
Even if we don't love the order of how they are, that's a really good structure. And he really had a shot to take, a Dalton there, which I thought, with no quarterback yet, and he kind of missed the opportunity. What did you think, Izzy?
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. I thought Lacey, I can understand. I totally agree with taking a White or a Matthews would probably have been a better choice there. If you look at it from a dynasty perspective, we always look at it. How many people would accept a Lacey straight up for Kevin White? I mean, on Twitter, we're looking at 95.5, right? Excuse me. So we look at this and say, that was probably a mistake. Could he take a quarterback? Probably. Excuse me. So I look at this, I see that as a glaring mistake as well. Zach Ertz, a little early, like you mentioned there, taking another quarterback. Andy Dalton would have, even Eli Manning would have been the right pick there. Then he would have gotten you still take Fitzpatrick there, and you got your 3 quarterbacks. But now he's left with just Palmer, Fitzpatrick, and Jimmy Garoppolo. So he's gonna have to go fishing for another quarterback somewhere. But yeah, overall, I think this team, and we'll get to the end of it, where we think these teams may fall in 2016. Kind of our tiers. We'll do top 4, middle 4, bottom 4. But overall, I think he did a pretty good job considering the amount of drinks that he was taking down. But yeah, I think it was a solid draft. Go ahead.
Yeah, but I mean, even like Fitzpatrick, that's a good value there. Value. It was just the mixture of it. It kind of threw me off. Coates is a pretty good gamble, I guess, for a young guy with Fitzgerald can help with there. But it just seemed a little quick with, if you're all in, which it kind of seems like you are, because older.
Yeah.
You want to get another guy to help support that run for 2016. So it's going to be interesting. But again, we have a little bit of a scenario later. We'll talk about the playoffs, so we'll talk more about him there.
For sure. And like you had mentioned, Hopkins, you said top 4 or 5. You could make an argument that he was top 3, which is fine. But you look at this, and we highlight this at the draft, and we look down, and you kind of talked about it briefly, but all of these guys are old. Every single one of them, besides Hopkins, Cooks, you can consider. I mean, Lacey's not old, but you look at Jordy, C.J. Anderson might not be old, but they're running back. So when we talk about longevity, a couple of years and who knows, LaShawn McCoy, tread, running low. You have Palmer old, Forte old, Fitzpatrick, Fitzgerald. And then you take a couple young guys, which is great, but then you have Gates, then you have a veteran in Wright, Kenyon Drake, where I don't think he's really going to profile as anything more than maybe, a third down back. And then at the end, you still take Ty Montgomery, lower upside, Brandon LaFell, we know what he can do. Take Calvin Johnson, which really isn't a horrible pick.
No, actually, I kind of liked it.
I mean, at 22, it is whatever, but he is really going for a 2016 because in 2017, 2018, he is going to have to hit big on rookies or make some moves at some point in time. But he's set up really nicely for 2016. We'll get to that later. Moving on to Dan Sanyo. Once again, I think a team that did some really great things, missed a couple of times. Actually, just one thing that I felt was a big mistake, and I think it was more of a fear factor issue, and you can kind of tell with the pink across the middle than anything else. But he did a lot of great things in this draft. I mean, we might have got 4 or 5 guys that we felt were, good values or steals. Take me through your reaches and your steals for Dan.
Yeah. So a couple of real good picks, and he got Latavius Murray, which I'm not a fan of Latavius Murray. But when we're talking about the 9th round and you're going to get a guy that's going to get that quarter point per carry, get the PPR, I mean, they're going to feed him that late. I mean, I thought that was pretty good value. I mean, when you come back around, I mean, a Matt Jones and a Ajayi and like they're all question marks, but Latavius has done it, even if it hasn't been at a level people expected. At least he's done it, and he's going to do it again next year. So I thought that was a good value. Kamar Aiken, I like him as well. I mean, someone has to do it in Baltimore. He has the best shot at doing that. He's still only 27, everybody. I know people think he's super old. I like the Tavon Austin pick. I know Izzy's a little bit more down on Tavon than I am. But again, with the carries in there, Tavon went over 200 points in this format last year. And getting him, round 12, I mean, that's pretty good too. So when you look at how he designed the team, I mean, even Tajay Sharp, which is running with the ones in Tennessee right now, DGB, he took him too.
Handcuffs.
Handcuff. But that was a good pick. So lots of good picks, but in 4 receivers and 2 quarterbacks, and he still got another quarterback and another couple of runs. It was good positionally, but Eifert, Kelsey went, Fleener, Ertz, and then he took Green. It just seemed like a little bit of a reach here.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And once again, another team that probably could have waited. In hindsight, it's always 2020, but I'd much rather wait on Ladarius. You got Julius Thomas, you got Delaney Walker, you got Ebron, you got Ladarius. I mean, those 4 guys you can kind of clump into a tier. So even if you pass on them here, it's unlikely that all 4 are going to be gone. And if 3 of them are taken between now and then, maybe you just take them here. You can provide yourself with once again, Sanders, I think, was one of the better values in this draft. Why not take a Sanders, or why not take even a Gio Bernard instead of Ladarius Green? I don't know how many people, even in a tight end premium, would take Ladarius Green over Gio Bernard. Not many. So I think a huge reach. Hasn't proven anything throughout his career. I like Ladarius Green, but I don't like Ladarius Green at all in the 7th round. But I agree. He had 5 probably really good picks. Robert Griffin was even a really solid pick in round 15. Like you mentioned, Tajay Sharp. I like Terrence Williams down here. He's had a pretty bad rap. If you look at his career numbers, he's been pretty good, and relatively pretty good. He definitely shouldn't be the wide receiver 60 coming off the board, or 65, wherever he is. So I thought Dan overall did a pretty good job with his draft. I love his top 2 picks. I like what he did early. I just think, just like Carla and Dan Myler, they had an error here, and I think it really is going to set their team back quite a bit based on what was left on the board. Going on to yours truly, Mr. Nick Whalen. Nick showed up, since this was a dry draft, or not a dry draft, but what is it? What we want to call it? A caveman draft?
Yeah,
we want to call it. Yeah,
old school.
It's a caveman
maybe.
draft. No computers, no nothing. Nick didn't even show up with a printout. He showed up with a notepad, a notebook with nothing inside of it. So he wrote down his QB, running back, and it was all blank. And he basically was hoping to just draft based off of memory. Horrible idea. But
don't do that.
But definitely don't do that. He actually salvaged a pretty good roster. I mean, he, just like, Nick and I, if you look at our first few rounds, I took 5 straight wide receivers, and he was following suit. He said, "Hey, once you break the seal, I'm going to break the seal, but until then, I'm not doing it." He took Evans, Watkins, White, Treadwell, Macklin, Hearns, Sanders, Aguilar. He went in 8 out of the first 9 picks at receiver, and I felt all of them were really good value. Nelson Aguilar, I felt maybe was the reach. He could have done something differently there. Nick would have had a really good 2016 if he would have made one simple decision of substituting Nelson Aguilar for DeMarco Murray. If he makes that change, he has DeMarco Murray, Matt Jones, Jonathan Stewart, Rashad Jennings, 4 solid pieces for 2016. Low investment. So even if they don't have jobs next year, hypothetically, he doesn't have a huge investment in them in the 9th round and later. That's not a big deal. His core was solid. He was able to get Andy Dalton, Alex Smith at good value later on. His tight ends were weak, but the stable that he has at running back, the fact that he can start 5 of these guys every week, and he doesn't even have to start Kevin White and Laquan Treadwell every week. I mean, he starts Mike Evans, Sammy Watkins, Jeremy Macklin, Alan Hearns, Emmanuel Sanders. I mean, that's 5 wide receiver 2s or better every single week. That was his advantage. He didn't need to take Aguilar. I think that was a huge mistake. It's on par with the tight ends, just based on the individually as the pick. It's not horrible, but the way that his team was set up, I thought it was a really bad decision, and that's what happens when you don't show up prepared to a draft. He probably forgot DeMarco Murray was still on the board. He didn't have anything in front of him. But hell, for a guy that didn't have anything, I would say this is a pretty good draft. Take me through your strategy. What were you planning on doing? You probably weren't planning on doing much with nothing at the draft, but go ahead.
Yeah. I would not recommend what I did to many people. It was in a way. This was fun for me just to meet everybody and to have fun and do that. So the draft part of it, I mean, we're in so many different leagues. I was like, it's really not going to be that bad. It hit about round 2 or 3, and I'm like, I'm going to write down at least all of the teams in the NFL, and I'm like, I'll go from there. So that's what I ended up doing. But honestly, what I wanted to do was just see how the draft played out. I wanted to go wide receiver, young wide receivers early, and then just take some value. And what we talked about in the DLF Dynasty podcast, actually last week with Brian Malone, he talked about a fake punt. And it was something I recently did in a Dynasty draft, and it worked out really well, where you take young guys early, and then you take values with veterans late. So that's kind of what I ended up doing. Now, again, it was difficult because I had to remember what people were, but just kind of walking through. I mean, Evans right away, that was the easy pick for me. Coming back, it was probably either Watkins or Jeffrey, and then I was thinking either White, Treadwell, Parker, a couple of those guys. That'd be nice to get them. I didn't want to flinch. I didn't want to take a quarterback because I felt like they were getting pushed early. We talked about Mariota and Winston, and I thought those are big mistakes. Didn't want to touch tight end. And running back, hey, we know how the values of those go. So I wasn't going to do that. So I got White. It came back around. Parker went. I wanted him. I got Treadwell. Hey, fine with me. Then it came back, and I kind of wanted DGB, which I know Izzy isn't a fan of. And I'm sitting on the board, and again, I don't have a list. But I'm like, why is Jeremy Macklin still out there? So I'm like, I guess I'll take him. So I took Macklin, and some people kind of groaned. So I'm like, okay, maybe that was okay. And then I'm like, okay, Izzy at this point hasn't taken anything but receiver. So we're going to play chicken, and I'm not going to blink. But Melvin Gordon's he's kind of my boy. So if he came back to me, I was going to take him, but I didn't want to, blank. He went right before me, so dodged a bullet, right? I'm still going to hold my own. And I took Alan Hearns because I'm really big on Alan Hearns, young receiver. He fits the mold of these guys are going to have their value is going to be very sustained over time. Okay. So Izzy blinked, took another position. Okay. Pressure's off. Took a couple of quarterbacks. I really lucked out with Alex Smith later. Emmanuel Sanders, again, just like Macklin, didn't plan on taking another receiver, but I don't know why he's still there. Aguilar, I freaked out, man. You ever have that in a draft? You're like, oh, no, my guy went. I wanted Latavius Murray. He was like, that's the guy. And then he went right before me. And again, I'm going off of memory. I only had two guys in my head, so I took Aguilar, who I like. So anyway, I'm really weak at tight end. Jimmy Graham, Charles Clay, Cameron Brate, and Tyler Higbee. I mean, hopefully something works out there for me. I'm probably going to make a couple of trades to make that work. Running back, and again, with those veterans getting value later, Jonathan Stewart, I thought that was a pretty good value. Even Jimmy Graham. Think if Jimmy Graham comes back at 75% of what he is. At that point, I'm going to take 75% of Jimmy Graham over what Dwayne Allen is, over whatever Gates has left, etc. I thought that was decent. Rashad Jennings, again, he's going to have some value this next year. We already know that, versus some other players who might not ever do it again. Sanchez, again, I wanted another quarterback to insulate it. Clay, we know he's okay. So that's kind of that veteran run that I went on of just taking guys that they're actually going to do something to help insulate this crazy wide receiver run that I went on. I have done that once before, but only once, and it worked out good for me, but that was not my initial plan. That was, you go into a draft with a plan, but you have to be able to adjust your plan, and if you don't, you're going to miss out on value.
I agree. I like kind of overall what you did. Like I said, the one error might come back to bite you long term, or actually just short term for 2016. But you have enough pieces here to make some moves before the season, or even into the season, to shore up what potentially could be an issue with the running backs. But I think you have a pretty good stable for 2016, so you should be okay. Moving on to Jacob Feldman, who, we probably agree, and we'll get into this later, had a really, really good draft. What did you like? And it's going to be kind of funny. It can be contradictory of what you talked about earlier. What did you like and what did you not like that Jacob did?
Yeah, I mean, overall, if I had to pick one draft, I thought Jacob did the best. And we kind of had to search through, and it was tough to find a pick that wasn't a good pick for him. I mean, he didn't reach. He stayed within himself. He spread it out really well. I mean, you can even look. I mean, quarterbacks is, that's the main thing here. I mean, Luck and Rivers and Goff, that's a mix of veterans. That's a mix of good potential, youth, everything. He's got two younger running backs here with Ingram and Gordon. He's got Dez, Parker, Edelman, Gordon, Crabtree. I mean, when you think of that, you have a veteran, you have a young guy, you have a huge gamble in Gordon, but then you have the veteran with Crabtree to sustain it. I mean, it's a really good blend altogether. You could, obviously argue tight end is weak with Martellus, Kyle Rudolph, etc. But I thought he had a really good draft. Now, talking individually, good values, reaches. Ironically enough, I think Melvin was about the best, was the biggest reach. Now, again, I already talked about this. I was going to take him here, but I reached, so whatever. And that was the one because when you think of, I guess, who was still on the board and where he took him overall, especially when you look at our ADP overall, and I think that's pick 63 if I remember right, with the Superflex tight end, it was a little bit early, but I mean, we're kind of splitting hairs here. So good values. Luck, that's a pretty good value, especially in a Superflex, getting him right in the beginning of round 2. Goff, again, another guy I was going to take, Jacob, so thank you for that right here. I was going to take him. I thought that was a good value, especially when you look at who was still on the board. I mean, Teddy, Fitzpatrick, Wentz, those are the guys that are left, and Goff has the biggest potential there. He may have the highest floor there as well because I really like what he can do. So overall, really like what he did. What are some thoughts that you have, Izzy?
Yeah. I don't like the Melvin Gordon pick. Everybody knows that I'm not a Melvin Gordon guy at all. So I really, really dislike the pick. But I think Gio's just a better pick there, especially later on. A lot of the clump, looking at the round 9 running backs, the Duke Johnsons, Derrick Henrys, the Lataviuses, the DeMarcos, even Matt Jones. I mean, I'm okay with those guys over a guy like Melvin Gordon. I'd rather take, a Hearns or a Marshall, or, short up with a running back or a receiver, or even one of these quarterbacks. But I think his best maneuvers were picking up the quarterbacks at the right times, and he actually picked the right quarterbacks, in my opinion. I thought Luck was a great pick there. I look at Phillip Rivers. I thought that was a solid pick. There's guys that you could say maybe they have more longevity than Rivers, but he provides a really nice ceiling. He just struggles in the playoffs. So eventually he'll put it together for the fantasy playoffs. Jared Goff, I agree. I think Tevin Coleman was really solid value down here. Overall, I think he had the strongest draft in terms of getting solid value. Now, we're not going to highlight all of his great values and steals, but really good value across the board. I don't think he made many mistakes. Mark Ingram is arguable. You can argue and say, well, maybe Mark is a little high there.
Yeah, I mean, Freeman's on the board 2 picks later, but again,
board.
that's probably his preference.
It's minor. So. They're minor issues. I love Chris Conley, so I'm okay with that pick there. And he's going to have to really get some help at tight end. But I think Rudolph might be a sneaky wide tight end 2 this year, and somebody that can at least help him, not be completely decimated at the tight end position. So I'm okay with what Jacob did. I thought it was a pretty solid draft altogether. And Jacob, you can tell he's smart. He had his head down. He was really easy to talk to. He was kind of giving up a lot of information, but he wasn't a guy that was definitely out of his element. He looked like this is like his 36th draft of the year, and he was in the zone. He was feeling it all night long.
Super nice guy, by the way. Too.
Great guy.
Great guy.
Going on to your husband at the draft, I believe it was, or was it your wife? I think it was George was your wife.
I'm the big spoon. He's the little spoon.
This is a little spoon. Yep. Okay, good. Yep. So George. George did exactly what Nick did. No draft board. Both from it might be a Milwaukee thing. You guys might be people from Wisconsin are just weird to begin with, so this just might be right down your alley. So George he showed up with the computer. He didn't get the email that we're going old school caveman style. He showed up with the computer. He's reluctant to give it up. He was desperately trying to hold on to it. He tried filing a grievance. None of it worked. We got rid of the laptop, and he had nothing. He actually did a pretty good job, all things considered. However, there's one. I think we probably agree that this is the biggest error in the entire draft. But he did pretty well. What did you like, and what did you not like?
So again, it was kind of funny to look over at him and tease each other because, again, with a couple pods, with him and actually hanging out with him in real life because we're by each other. Hey, hurry up with your pick as we're sitting there trying to imagine what guys are left and what a draft board looks like. So I thought he did okay. Again, he did similar to me. 5 of his first 6 are wide receivers. I thought he reached a little bit with Jordan Reed here. I understand it. Concussions are something I don't mess with. Obviously, last year was his ceiling. That's his ceiling. Can he do that again? We'll see. But that's the beginning of round 4. He has no quarterback at this point. I mean, even if you inserted Big Ben in there or another quarterback or a running back, I mean, even if you took Martin and put him in there, that would have made more sense to me than Reed. But, whatever he wants to do. The glaring pick was Tyler Boyd. Now, if I remember right, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Izzy, George made the first error of saying a guy's name. Hey, I don't remember who it was. Do you?
God, I can't remember who it was. Let me think about it while you're...
Okay.
I think it was Tyler Lockett.
It was Tyler Lockett. He picked Tyler Lockett, and it was... Oh, yes, it was Tyler Lockett, because then he's like, then I'll take Tyler Boyd. I think Tyler was on his mind. And Tyler Boyd is so out of place right here. I mean, Allen Hurns, Sanders, as we talked about, Marshall, Brown, Decker. I mean, all of these guys should be well ahead of Tyler Boyd. So that's the one glaring pick. He did have some good values, though. Gio Bernard, as we've mentioned multiple times, that was a really good pick in round 7. I don't like DeMarco Murray as much as Izzy does, but still getting him in round 9, that's pretty good. When you go all the way down here, a guy that was on my mind was Buck Allen. Got him in round, 17? 18, actually. And when you look at it overall, somehow it's pretty overall balanced outside of 2 quarterbacks, Eli and Brock Osweiler. He only has 2, and Brock, you scare me. Okay, he needs to get it together. But he put together a pretty solid team. No stud running back. Gio's his best one. He's got a lot of those running back 2s with Murray, Sims, Riddick, Crowell, Buck. But he's got enough of them there to be good as a group. So he scrambled and made it work with no notes.
Yeah, so. Scramble is a good way to put it. And I agree. Tyler Boyd, the biggest reach in all the draft. Even you look at Michael Thomas, who should be ahead of him, was drafted 2 rounds later. So that's what he could have done. I mean, he had a good draft, and he basically blew a 6th-round pick. Not saying that Boyd is completely unsalvageable, but he took a guy that probably would have went somewhere in the 10th round, maybe 11th round, and he took him in the 6th. So a pretty big reach for me personally. I like Gio. I like DeMarco. I like what he did at running back. The funny thing is he's putting all his eggs this season into Brock Osweiler. He mentioned on the Periscope that he actually does not treat Superflexes as a 2-quarterback league like everybody else does, where most people, when they see Superflex, like, well, I got to start 2. He went in and said, well, I don't always have to start 2 quarterbacks, so I'm okay not having 2 great ones, and even if Brock doesn't pan out, he can put somebody else in there. But I disagree. I think you need 2 quarterbacks to win a league like this, and I think he missed an opportunity. The interesting thing is, I don't think he went into this, and nobody ever goes into this in Dynasty format as paying attention to bye weeks, but he's going to be giving up week 9, right? He's got AJ Green, and not even to mention Boyd and Green are on the same team. He's got them both. So he's got 2 Cincy. This was a error of all errors. He made a huge mistake. There's no other way around it. Even if he says, no, this is my plan, we know it's BS. So we look at Gio, that's his week 9 bye. Brock's got a week 9 bye. Floyd, Reed. He's losing week 9, right? And honestly, in redraft, that's not a bad strategy. Finding guys that are all in the bye weeks at the same time and just saying, I'll just give up that week, but I'm not going to lose any of those. I'm going to have full strength the rest of the way. So I think that's going to be a big advantage for him this season. We'll get to him later in terms of what tier he falls into, but overall I think he did a pretty good job. I think you both did a really good job not having the notes that everybody else did, or at least the material that everybody else did. Last but not least, Trevor Bucher, who just like Finley had a very different draft than everybody else. His draft stood out, and that's because he was the last person to take a receiver, and he took it in the 7th round. He took 6 other positions before he got to his receiver, which is, if you read anything nowadays, it's basically take receivers, do not wait, and he waited. And in this format, you can get away with it. Having the super flex, having the points per carry, having the tight end premium, you can get away with it, but you have to hit your receivers, and you can't necessarily wait this long. I think he waited a round too long. He could have taken, he probably could have said, okay, Jamal, you're going to somebody else. I'm not going to draft you. I'm going to take a receiver because I need to fill that void. But he brought up a good point on the Periscope. He said, I feel that Jamal Charles is going to outscore any of these other receivers that are left on the board. So I'm going to slot him into my flex, and I'll worry about the receiver position later. So I understand where he was going with it, but definitely not something I probably would have done. But what do you like and what do you not like about his draft?
Okay. So Trevor sat across from me, and, interacting with him, I was jealous. He had all these sheets and all these names, and I was kind of intimidated. I was like, man, he knows who's the best value right now. I have no idea. So he's right across from me. Nice guy. Man, he was ready to go. So I was a little intimidated by all of his sheets. But yeah, like you said, very different build. Starting out with 2 young, good quarterbacks. And again, I'm going to put Blake Bortles into the good category because of last season. Whether that happens year after year, we still don't know, but he proved it. So Cam and Bortles, that's a real good start. Zeke and Freeman, I thought were still good values too, especially in the format. So right there, 4 good picks. I can't argue Greg Olsen here in round 5 when Reed went almost, it's just over a full round earlier. So I thought that's a real good start. But like you said, in the format, receivers, it's going to hurt. So talking about real good values, steals, things like that. Some of these I thought were values, especially Devontae Freeman. When you get him after Eddie Lacy, AP, even Mark Ingram, whether you're nervous about his end of the season or not, that's good value. Some of these other picks, not so much. Devin Funchess, I'm sorry. I'm not a believer in it'd be the end of round 7 when, even Josh Gordon, which is a big risk, is on the board. Emmanuel Sanders is on the board. that's the guy that you have to take, especially when you're committed. Jamal Charles, you're committed for this season, and Devin Funchess isn't going to do what Sanders is going to do this season. So I thought that was a big missed opportunity there. Later on in the same realm, I thought Phil Dorsett was a reach because I don't see him doing it this year. And you could have grabbed even another running back, a third quarterback, a different receiver like Deshaun Jackson that could help you this season. So that was ones I thought that maybe he could have done something different there. I'm not a Kenny Bell fan. Maybe he is. I thought that was a bit of a reach. Same with Darius Hayward-Bay. So again, kind of different than what I did. So remember when I was talking about later on in my draft, I wanted the veterans that were going to help me out. I knew they were going to do something. Later on, he took a bunch of young wide receivers, and to me, it didn't jive, Izzy. You know what I mean? Like when you're taking this is a great start. If you took veteran receivers later to blend that together, and it just didn't really happen. But it wasn't all bad picks. I really liked Michael Thomas, as you had touched on earlier, a couple rounds after Tyler Boyd. Marvin Jones even, that's that veteran that, hey, he's actually going to be a wide receiver to wide receiver 3. That's good, but you had to surround that because right now, Marvin Jones is the best receiver, and then I'm not sure who the next best is.
Yeah, absolutely. This was a missed opportunity because I think he made a couple mistakes with the selections that he made. I think he needed more stability than taking guys. And I understand the upside thing, but like you said, taking Jamal Charles, taking Greg Olsen, you're even Devontae Freeman, you're taking guys that maybe have a year or two window. And I get Devontae Freeman's young, but running backs are always flimsy. I'm not going to invest in a third-round running back without making sure that I'm going to have a legitimate shot at competing in 2016. I'm just not going to do it. Here's where I think he missed a vital opportunity. Kenny Bell, right before Marcus Wheaton. If you're talking about trying to win in 2016, or at least trying to find pieces that you can stream, why would you take Kenny Bell when you have Marcus Wheaton, who I think is going to produce as a wide receiver 3 at worst this season? If you have Marcus Wheaton plugged in there and you can roll with Marvin Jones, Marcus Wheaton, and even like a Dorsett, Michael Thomas, one of these guys can pan out, I'm okay with that 3 because you also have Jameson Crowder who might be able to produce wide receiver 4 numbers, wide receiver 3 numbers. That was a vital mistake. I think if he has that pick, he's competing without Marcus Wheaton, and I get it, it's just Marcus Wheaton, but the difference between Kenny Bell and Marcus Wheaton for 2016 is huge. So I thought that was an issue. I like the Spencer Ware pick down here. That's a good handcuff for Jamal Charles. And I agree with your exact thing. The Funchess, Dorsett is sneaky. We had talked about, what's Luck going to do? He's probably going to throw for 4,500 yards. They really only have 3 receivers. Dwayne Allen hasn't stayed healthy, and he's not a huge receiving threat. You don't like Josh Ferguson, so is Frank Gore going to catch a lot of passes? So if he throws for 4,500 yards, they got to go somewhere. And Dorsett, if they're going to go 3 wide receiver sets, he's going to be the beneficiary. We had mentioned, we talked about, the greatest show on turf. They were able to have 3 wide receivers. When we had Kurt Warner was part of 2 of those because he had, Fitzgerald, Bolden, and Breston that all had 1,000 yards.
Probably a reason for that. It's a pretty good quarterback.
Yeah.
That Kurt Warner guy.
Exactly. You look at Manning, he did it twice, and I think the most recent time was with Stokely in the slot with Marvin Harrison, Reggie Wayne. So this could be that next 3 with Moncrief, T.Y. Hilton, and Dorsett that do cross the 1,000 yards. I mean, I get it's a long shot, but I would not be surprised if it happened. So that's going to be important for him. But yeah, like you said, individually, each of these picks is great. I think he did a phenomenal job. But when you look at the structure of the entire team, then it's like, yeah, individually great picks. Structurally, I don't love it, but I understand it. So that's kind of highlighting 1 through 12. Any final thoughts before we transition to the tiers?
No. I mean, it was really interesting and a lot of fun. So I know people, if they're watching this and we're picking apart their teams, we're not really doing that. We're trying to look at this not in terms of individual picks necessarily, but how that looks into the bigger picture. And I think this is pretty cool.
All right. So now that we recapped, all 12 teams and kind of what the assembly was and the thought process and what we liked, what we didn't like, we kind of looked at this and said, for 2016, I get it's Dynasty, but everyone wants to know, who do we think had the best draft for 2016? We can maybe even talk about who might have had a good draft for long term. in terms of the tiers, let's break it down from who we think may have not had the best draft for 2016. Give me a few teams, just kind of give me the teams if you can remember the individuals that we talked about beforehand, or what you think, maybe if it's different than mine. Who do you think are the 4 teams that are probably in the third tier for 2016?
Okay, so you're saying they're going to be getting the top picks for that 2017 class?
Potentially.
Okay.
Yep. I mean, assuming, and here's the thing, there will be trades made before the season. Just looking at it from a pure draft perspective, who was assembled for 2017 over 2016?
Okay, I think the McDowell and Brian Malone, with the young players, I think so many things have to go right for them to make the playoffs. Now, again, this is the time when teams are going to be the most even, so these are going to be slivers of things. But that was one team I think that is probably going to be out. Ryan Finley, which we talked about, he's got some young pieces in here that got to go right. Tight end's tough, and plus you got a 4-game suspension of your second player. That's just a lot to overcome. So I'm not sure that he can. Carla, again, that weird mixture of a young guy mixed in with we're gonna win mixed in with a lot of question marks, and wide receiver. I'm just not feeling that one either. And then the last one is Trevor, in which we just talked about. But receivers, you have to start at least 3 of them, and I don't see 3 of them that are going to be that good to overcome and make the playoffs.
Yeah, and we had talked about it. I think we agree. I think McDowell and Malone team, I think that is going to be assembled for the future. Finley, same thing. Carla, it's sneaky, and it kills me because those 2 picks, the Procise Fleener, it could have been. I know it's a 7th and a 9th round pick, but it could have been so much more because now you're looking at, your wide receiver 3 is Rashard Matthews. That's going to be tough. Because your top 2 even at running back, you have Adrian Peterson, Chris Ivory, CJ Procise, Alex Collins. These 2 guys are backups. They're backing each other up, and they're not even the main 2, or the main 1. They're not even so you really only have 2 running backs, Peterson and Ivory, with no 3rd wide receiver. It's going to be tough, and that is the price you pay when you start out with 3 tight ends in the first 10 picks. Frankly, it's going to be a tough hole to climb out of. She has leverage at the tight end position to make some trades. There are teams that are looking for tight ends, so she might be able to make some moves for pieces. And what's nice about this draft is that there's going to be a lot of movement, my guess is because there are holes everywhere. When we look at drafts, there's always draft. This is probably one of the few drafts where I've gone into it and be like, every team really did a pretty good job drafting. There's usually a pick. I mean, I get Tyler Boyd is probably that pick, but there's usually 10 picks where you're like, wow, that's so early. And in this draft, it might have been only 1 or 2 where I was like, that's so early. You could tell everybody is a veteran. This is a really strong group of drafters. The strategies were different, but the values were solid all day long. And with only a minute going off the board, it's pretty impressive. So, and I agree. I think Trevor's same thing. I think our bottom 4 for 2016, as it stands right now, I agree that having to overcome the receivers is going to be tough. If these guys hit, Trevor goes from potentially the bottom tier to one of the top teams if he gets some of these guys to actually pan out for this season. So he's a sneaky team. I kind of like it as a dark horse for this season. Going into the middle tier, who do you have in the middle of the group? So maybe guys that could make this a team that could potentially push for a contending semifinals, finals, or could be at the bottom of this pack.
Okay. So I'm gonna start out, and I hope it doesn't hurt. I think you're in there, man. I mean, you want wide receiver heavy, and this is obviously the strength of your team because you're going to get the full PPR. All of these guys. Moncrief's the biggest question mark, but at least he's done it for 2 years. You have a lot of sustained production there, which is good, and a good tight end, a couple good quarterbacks. But your running backs, I mean, Duke, I'm not a fan. I'm sorry, I'm just not a fan of Duke Johnson, and I don't know who your next best running back really is.
So good.
Really is. And then some of the depth too. I mean, Travis Benjamin, so that helps out there. Clive Walford's your backup tight end, so it's kind of in there. I think you're going to have to make some moves to really help out at running back because even if Duke's not playing, You got to start another one in his bye week, and I'm just not sure how it's all going to come together. So, anyways, you make a couple trades, you could get up in there, but right now you're in the middle, all right? And plus, Martavis isn't even going to play this year. I think Mo Barrington's in there too. I like, again, so he's got the 3 quarterbacks. That's already good. Running backs, dangerous, but still question marks. So David Johnson, he's never done it for a full year. Carlos Hyde, he had 1 good game against Minnesota. It's been 2 years. We're still kind of waiting on him. TJ Yeldon, they brought in Chris Ivory. Derrick Henry, there's the DeMarco Murray, who's going to start. Langford, it's a committee, right? Is he the starter? Lots of question marks, but it could be really good. And he's got 2 studs at wide receiver, and then he's got not much else. Pierre Garçon, maybe Fuller, which we talked about. You don't want to count on rookies, especially year 1. I like his tight ends. They're good. So a lot of question marks. Again, if a couple things bounce right, hey, he could be in there. Dan Sanio, he's in there too. I think he's in the middle. Receiver, that's where his strength's going to be. Me and Izzy differ on a couple of guys in here, but Cooper, Jeffrey, Marshall, hey, going to be real good right there. Kamar Aiken, he's probably going to be the top one in Baltimore. I like Tavon Austin. Izzy's not a big fan, but then you get the points, the quarter point per reception in there. Quarter point per carry in there. He's probably the top guy. Goff's going to be better than Nick Foles. I mean, he has to be, right? And then we're not even talking about DGB, which that could be a big boomer bust. So pretty good there at wide receiver, which we didn't even talk about Terrence Williams and Tajay Sharp, which you had liked already. The Darius Green, we talked about it being a reach, but then he's still kind of insulated with a Dwayne Allen that, maybe he could do something there. 3 quarterbacks, that's all good. Amir and Latavius, and that's about all he's got at running back, and they have the same bye week. So it's not bad, but I just don't know if it's enough to go over the top when you got some young guys in here, not a lot of depth. So he's going to have to make some moves, I think, to kind of get in that top tier. And then, I took 8 receivers in the first 9 picks. So, I don't know how I can just say, yeah, I'm going to make it in. I definitely try to make a run there, I think, with, Dalton and Smith. Really lucky to get Smith where I got him. 3 quarterbacks. I'm definitely one of the worst quarterbacks units in the league. Matt Jones, Jonathan Stewart, Rashad Jennings. They're not scaring anybody. But I'm definitely, I should have probably the best wide receiver core. Maybe I can flip one of them. Tight end, I'm pretty weak. So I think I'm, it's borderline there. Hopefully my wide receivers could carry me, but I'm in that middle tier as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to kind of piggyback on this, the teams in the middle are missing a piece, right? And the piece for, my team is that running back. And what I try to do is I'm worried about the 2017 class, right? So I didn't want to spend any equity on running backs. And the only reason I took Duke is because I think that he's got a lot of hype currently going right now. And I think round 9 was decent value for him. And his upside is great because he really only has Crowell and Terrell Watson. He could gain some steam and I can move him potentially. But I tried to find running backs that have players that are either old or aren't that good or are injury prone down here. Wendell Smallwood, Ryan Matthews, we all know his injury history. Josh Ferguson, Frank Gore's 45, 46 years old. Cameron Artis-Payne, Jonathan Stewart, long history of lower body injuries. Sean Drone, Carlos Hyde, injury history. We don't know what his production is going to be. Sean Drone showed pretty well last year. Kyrie Robinson, Forte, also getting old. Tim Hightower, Ingram, injury history. So I tried finding guys that I could sneak in later on in the season if guys go down and I can make a run. So that was kind of my strategy, and I built there. So, but go ahead. You're going to say something?
So speaking of, you mentioned Terrell Watson, this Duke Johnson. I have Terrell Watson. We could do a trade like right here if you want.
I'm okay.
He could really carry you to the playoffs. We were just talking about that.
I guess you bring up some good points.
I tried.
And Mo Brewington, like you highlighted, there's just a bunch of things that just don't fit together. And this is the problem, is the 2 receivers early and then just the gap and nothing else there. So he's in a struggle, but he's got the ability to make moves with the running backs that he has. So he can make some moves. to get himself into that top 4. He's not that far off. He's pretty close. And then, Sanyo, same thing, basically exact same thing. I wouldn't change a thing that you said. I think you're on par, on point with what Sanyo's issues are. And then with your team, yeah, it's tough. I mean, having a bottom 2 quarterback grouping, Sanchez, who knows how he's going to be as a backup. The 3 running backs are solid as, later round guys. This is kind of an assembly that I like for a league like this, but I still think the Aguilar for DeMarco's gonna punish you, and I think you finished right in the middle. But if these guys all pan out, he's gonna be able to move these pieces to shore up the rest of it. So, I agree that's the middle 4. All right. All right.
Don't edit that out.
We're keeping it in. All right, on to what we feel is the top tier, the guys that drafted the best. And right now, before any trading's done, just coming out of the draft, who could potentially win? Starting with Austin. Who's left is Austin, Dan Myler, Jacob Feldman, and George Criticos. Take me through really quickly why you like them and why you feel that they're in the top 4.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think as you point out, those are the teams with the least amount of question marks, and that's kind of what you want. I mean, Austin only has Rodgers and Romo, which we pointed out. You need some more depth, especially with a guy with a big question mark there. But if they're healthy, they're pretty good quarterback duo. Productive, question mark, but productive and productive. So again, he blended in this Doxson pick with 2 veterans. That's what you want to do to compete this year. Elite tight end, okay. He's got some injury stuff going on, but then you got Zach Miller, pretty good veteran there. So that's he's not that good, but it's a good insulated pick there for the couple weeks that he might be out. And then again, value, I'm not a huge fan, but it's decent value there. And hey, this year he's got the gig. He's gonna produced last year. Maybe he does it this year. I mean, he blended together well what you need. And again, when you look late, what did he do? Did he shoot for the stars? He got a Vincent Jackson, Steve Smith. He got the guys that you could just throw in there when there's some bye weeks. So really like that smart strategy by Austin. He sat right by me. He probably took all the tips and tricks that I told him. No, I'm totally kidding. He's a really smart guy. All right, so that's Austin. Over here to Dan Myler. Okay, so Dan, we talked about loud, right? He announced all of his picks, but he's got a really good team. I mean, he waited on quarterback, and Fitzpatrick was a heck of a pick. It worked out well for him. But again, he's only got the 2 quarterbacks because when you look at the bye week of what Fitzpatrick is, ignore the 0. That's not what it is. It's actually week 11. He's not going to use Garoppolo the first 4 weeks when he's playing for Brady. So really he's only got 2 quarterbacks. That's going to hurt him. Again, that's a theme here. As you can kind of see, the guys that went with 3 quarterbacks, they're not as strong everywhere else. That's kind of how it works. But Lacey, CJ Anderson, Shady McCoy, Forte, that's pretty good. Receivers, Hopkins, Cooks, Jordy, Fitzgerald. I mean, that's, hey, veterans. They're going to produce. They're, and we had an issue with Ertz here, but then he backs it up with Gates. So, hey, guys that can produce, he's ready. He's ready to rock and roll. We had talked about Jacob had one of the best drafts that in the one of the best drafts in the league. I don't know. I forgot how to talk. This is weird. Sorry, everybody. 3 quarterbacks. The running backs are still solid. And then when you look at, we talked about the veterans, he got Aaron Foster. I thought it might have been a little bit of reach, because I got Jonathan Stewart to pick later. But, it makes sense because, hey, young, what's going to happen? He wants to compete right away. That's good. The gambles on his team, Josh Gordon could be good, could be bad, and his tight end is fairly weak. But it's an overall very insulated roster because you have a lot of studs. He invested in some solid veteran wide receivers. Again, you're going to hear that. When you want to compete, you got to have the veterans that have done it year in and year out. And lastly, George, you're not on here because, I know you're on here because it's a very balanced roster. And you probably just stumbled into it. That's probably what happened. It probably isn't by design. So, again, 5 receivers in the first 6 picks, but then you blended it together with Whedon, who you liked. Reed, again, even if he is a gamble, okay, panned out really well last year. But when you look later, Barnage he did really well. and it's still up in the air what's going to happen in Cleveland. You liked the Geo pick. Do you like the DeMarco pick? You know, Sims, Riddick. I mean, very insulated teams. That's kind of what the theme. But again, just like the other ones, only 2 quarterbacks. So that's kind of the secret. If you want to compete, only take 2 quarterbacks, I guess.
Well, it's not even just the competing. So here's the thing. When we looked at this and said, okay, how are the tiers set up? Who's going to probably make the playoffs? Who's our top 4? We really looked at it from the starting lineups. We didn't really highlight depth as a main concern because there's not a lot of teams that actually have it yet. I mean, there's going to be teams that find depth based on injuries and players panning out, so on and so forth. So we're just looking at it just purely based on starters. We are ignoring the fact that they only have 2 quarterbacks. So, you know, if Romo gets hurt, Austin's not finishing in the top 4, depending on when he gets hurt. If you look at Jacob Feldman, he's set up where that 3, this is why I think Jacob's the strongest, because he has a great roster and he's got 3 quarterbacks that he might be able to start this year. Goff is a question mark in terms of his production this year. You know, George, Dan Myler, these guys are going to be in a market for a quarterback. I mean, if Osweiler does not pan out, which is perfectly, I mean, in the realm of possibility, what does he do? He's not going to win with just one quarterback. So I'm guessing that these will change throughout the season, especially with the trades that are going to happen because it's inevitable. Every team, there's not a single team here that's set up and is ready to go week 1, in my opinion. Maybe a Jacob Feldman, but there is work to be done for all these teams. And you know, we're in a football chat together, where a lot of us are in multiple leagues together. So there's always going to be a dialogue there. I wouldn't be surprised, come knocking, if you guys are looking for a quarterback. I have 6 of them. So if you want it, McCown is really good, you know, send me an offer. But yeah, overall, I thought it was a great experience. Like I said, everybody was really good. There wasn't anybody that I said, this is a weak drafter. This is probably the highest competitive draft I've ever been a part of. And it was all archaic. I mean, just pen and paper. So it was really impressive that we were able to go old school and nobody outside of George, which we expected George to make a mistake. Like that was, if anything was guaranteed, it was George making a mistake, but he made up for it. So I thought it was really good. Any final takeaways? I think we covered most of everything. It was a great experience. I mean, coming down here, hopefully we can do it every few years, come down here and maybe do a rookie draft and highlight that. But, you know, credit to everybody that came. John Moser, DTC guy, you know, spent his weekend helping us out, doing extracurriculars for us. And none of this production, media, any of this would have happened without him. So great props to him. We appreciate all the help and support. And then all the, you know, Waz coming down and tweeting the entire.
Yeah, he tweeted every pick.
His thumbs were red, probably blue tomorrow. Really good. Our server, Danielle, we were in her way the entire time.
Yeah.
Gracious. Everything this weekend was terrific outside of having to deal with you all weekend.
Yeah.
But
my wife hates it too, so no big deal.
We were up until 3:00 in the morning arguing if Jay Cutler was average or not last night, and we're probably going to find a way to stay up tonight.
We're still going to solve it later.
Yeah, unsolved. But once again, you know, feedback's appreciated. If you guys want to toss us a line, let us know what you thought, and create a dialogue on Twitter. We'd love to have you guys. Other than that, yeah, thanks for joining us. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, reach out to anything. You know, John Moser at DTC, myself, Nick Whalen, and we'll help you guys out. But thanks again to everybody, like Nick was saying, and hopefully we'll be able to do this here in a couple of years. Thank you so much.